Ray McGovern, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. A little harassed today, but just got a draft done of a piece to run tomorrow. So
And
I'm
this
with you.
is this about the New York Times trying to keep Russiagate going? Is it with dubious sources?
Yes, we've been seeing them at their last gasp, but they have a lot of gasps and a lot of, well, I would call them Pulitzer-winning prostitutes. Prostitutes, careful how I say that, because they feed at the CIA trough. And because they're writing for the New York Times, all my friends in New York believe them. It's really very sad, but that's all they have. And of course, everyone relies on the New York Times, even though their record is, well, shall we say, very spotty on these issues.
They certainly are. Now, I first became aware of you a good few years back now, Ray. I've only been doing this about 3 years, and I became aware of you after an interview you did with Lee Camp on RT. And
Hmm.
it was an incredibly interesting interview to me because you were talking about when you were, it's a CIA you were in, and you were recounting an interview, recounting an incident rather, that happened all the way back in the early 1980s with Ronald Reagan and the then new CIA director, Bill Casey. Can you recount that story? Would you like to recount that story? And because I think it's got some relevance as to the New York Times and just how bad their reporting is and why the media is so bad.
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, that's very fresh in my mind since I was questioned on that. A commenter under the course Consortium News website asked me about that. It's very simple. When Ronald Reagan came into office in January 1981, he held a cabinet meeting a couple of weeks later. It was in early February 1981. And he had all the cabinet officers, and Bill Casey, as you may know, was a cabinet member in those days, which is really strange and irregular. Uh, CIA directors are not supposed to be having anything to do with formulating policy.
Mm-hmm.
They support policy, they give the information, they don't make the decisions. But Casey was different. I'll tell you how different. Reagan asked each one of his cabinet members to tell a little bit about what they're doing and what the major objective is. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they went down the line and they got to Bill Casey, and he said, "Well, you know what I'm doing." He said, "But my major objective is this. We'll know that our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American people believe is a lie."
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason that he had started this disinformation campaign was because he found out one of the things that he found. I remember you saying was in his first few weeks in the job, he found that most of the intel that was coming through the CIA channels was through the media, wasn't it?
That's right. Actually, that came also from the source here. The woman who was there at that meeting, her name is Barbara Honegger,
Mm-hmm.
and she testifies to this. Actually, she reported it to a Washington Post reporter friend, and it was publicized at the time. Yeah, that was an interesting part of the whole deal. Here's Casey coming in, master spy of World War II, and finding to his shock that most of the information we relied upon, particularly we Soviet specialists, Russian specialists, was publicly available. I mean, it just did square with his idea of what intelligence gathering and intelligence analysis was all about. You had to have a spy, you had to, have some electronic thing. So that was interesting. They would say that he was really surprised that his analysts depended so much on overt information. Well, it's about all we had on the Soviet Union. Occasionally, an aerial photo or a satellite photo would help, or an intercept. but generally just to confirm what we had already reasoned to from the propaganda. And I have to say that what we used to call propaganda analysis, now it's called media analysis. Well, that was by far the most lucrative discipline that we had to go on. I mean, you could tell changes in policy by what they actually said. You had to be disciplined. You had to figure out what these words meant and when they changed, what the significance was. So for that to be a real eye opener for Casey, that was interesting in and of itself. I used to see him every morning when I came back from briefing the president's daily brief downtown. He held a meeting about 11:30, and he wanted to know what people were interested in. And my problem with Casey was I couldn't understand them. I mean, I come from New York too, and I thought I knew the dialect, but people used to say, he didn't need any special device to mumble his speech so that no one could comprehend it. I mean, it was pretty much mumbled already, and I had some problems with my supervisors who tagged along at these briefings. I said, "Don't keep asking him what he said. Don't keep asking him what he says." I said, "Well, wait a second, until I understand what he says, I'm not going to ask him any questions." No, please. So it helped that I'm a little hard of hearing too. So that was Casey for me.
Yeah, when I remember when I listened to your interview with Lee Camp, that I became so interested in that meeting. I did some research, and there was a guy who was writing, Jack, I think his name, Jack something. His name escapes me now, but I remember I came across an article that he'd written in a newspaper about Bill Casey and about how he had been appointed CIA director, and there was a shroud of controversy around him because he was actually, when he was appointed CIA director back in 1980, 81, whenever it was, by Reagan, he was actually under investigation for illegally trying to start a coup in Libya. This was what the investigation was, wasn't it? And I found out that he was trying to basically start a disinformation campaign in Libya. This was the accusation. I think his name was Jack Shepard, the reporter. I can't. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter anyway, and he found out that basically what Bill Casey and the CIA were trying to do was to try and oust Colonel Gaddafi in Libya by a disinformation campaign that alleged that he was selling slaves to Mauritania. And obviously, Gaddafi eventually was toppled with the help of the factions within the United States. And I find it really ironic that